Nora Finch's hands went still the moment the truck turned off the main road. She hadn't expected a gate. A real gate, iron and rust-weathered, with a hand-lettered sign wired to the crossbar, Cutter Ridge Ranch, private. She hadn't expected the way the land opened up beyond it either. Not pretty, not the kind of wide open that makes you feel free. The kind that makes you feel small, flat-bottomed and bone-dry, Wyoming sky pressing down like a lid. She hadn't expected any of this. But then, she hadn't expected to be here at all. 3 weeks ago, Nora had been a veterinarian with a practice, a lease on an apartment in Cheyenne, and a fiancé who kept her photograph on his desk at the law firm. Now she had a suitcase with a broken zipper, a name on a piece of paper, and a marriage license she'd signed without meeting the man whose name sat next to hers. Bridger Cott. She'd read it so many times it had stopped looking like words. The lawyer, her lawyer technically, though she'd only met him twice, had said Bridger Cott was a fair man, quiet. That he needed someone with a practical skill set, someone steady, and that the arrangement was straightforward. She would live at Cutter Ridge, help with the ranch animals, and appear by all accounts to be a married woman. He needed a wife on paper to satisfy a clause in his grandfather's estate before the land reverted to a cousin who'd sell it to developers within the week. She needed what she needed, and she didn't feel like explaining it to anyone. The truck stopped. A woman of about 60, who ran the only taxi service in 3 counties, and asked no questions, which Nora appreciated, parked at the edge of a gravel yard and said, "This is it." Nora got out. The yard was swept clean in the way that only people who've stopped caring about appearances bother with. Not tidy, just emptied out. A barn that needed paint. A water trough with a crack running along the bottom, patched with something dark. 2 horses, standing in the near pasture, watching her the way horses do, absolutely motionless. And a man on the porch steps. He wasn't what she'd pictured. She didn't know what she'd pictured. Someone older, maybe. Someone more obviously in need. Bridger Cott was somewhere in his mid-30s, tall the way men who work land tend to be tall, not built up but worn into it. Dark hair, jaw like he'd forgotten to shave for a week and then decided he didn't care. He was looking at her the way the horses were looking at her, like he was trying to figure out what kind of creature had just walked onto his property. Then he said, "You're earlier than they said." It wasn't a greeting. She wasn't sure it was an accusation either. "The drive was shorter than expected," she said. He nodded once, looked at her suitcase. Looked at the taxi pulling back down the road. Something moved across his face that she couldn't name. "I'll show you where you'll sleep," he said, and turned and went inside. Nora picked up her suitcase and followed him. The house smelled like coffee and dust and something underneath that. Old wood, old fire, old grief. She noticed the walls first, not bare, but emptied in a specific way. Rectangles where pictures had been, the paint slightly brighter in those patches. Someone had taken things down without painting over the evidence. The room he showed her was off the back hall. Small, clean, a window that looked out over the east pasture. Single bed with a quilt that someone's grandmother had made. She recognized the pattern, double wedding ring. She didn't say anything at all. Bridger said from the doorway, "I'm up before 5 most mornings. Coffee's on the counter, make it yourself." "I don't." He stopped. "I don't cook much." "I do," Nora said. He looked at her like she'd said something unexpected. "You're a vet. I'm a vet who can also make breakfast." He left her to unpack. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. A door somewhere, his boots on the floor, then quiet. What have you done, she thought, and then it doesn't matter. Forward. She unpacked. Breakfast, it turned out, was its own kind of negotiation. The first morning, Nora found eggs in the refrigerator and sourdough that had gone stiff but could be salvaged, and she made French toast and set a plate at the table before Bridger came in from the early chores. He stopped in the doorway of the kitchen, looked at the plate, looked at her. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I was making it for myself. There was extra." He sat down, ate without complaining. She'd been afraid he would say something about it every morning after, make it a thing, but he didn't. By the third morning, he just sat down, poured his coffee, and waited. By the fifth, she started making enough bacon for both of them, without anyone discussing it. She noticed, from the window over the sink, that he moved through the yard with the particular efficiency of someone who'd done the same work alone for so long that he'd optimized every motion. He didn't waste anything. Time, words, steps. She watched him repair the fence post near the water trough on the second day. Not because it was urgent, she thought, but because she'd noticed the crack and he'd noticed her noticing it. He didn't say that. He just fixed it. On the fourth day, she went out to look at the horses. They were both quarter horses, she could see that, a bay mare and a grulla gelding with a white blaze. The mare had been favoring her right foreleg. Nora had seen it the first day and kept herself from saying anything, the way you hold back in a new house when you're not sure yet what's yours to touch. She was leaning on the fence rail, watching the mare move, when Bridger appeared beside her. "She's been off for about 3 weeks," he said. "Suspensory ligament," Nora said. "Left front, actually. She's compensating on the right because the left hurts more." He was quiet for a moment. "I thought it was the right. The right is where you can see the strain. The left is where the problem is." He looked at her for the first time like she might actually know something. Do you do horses?" "I'm a large animal vet," she said. "Horses are most of what I did." Did, past tense. He didn't catch it, or if he did, he let it go. She examined the mare properly that afternoon with Bridger standing at the horse's head, and she felt, for the first time since she'd arrived, like herself. Her hands knew this. Her hands had always known this even when the rest of her was lost. That night, Bridger said, at dinner, she'd made a proper dinner by then, something with the chicken she'd found in the freezer. "What'll she need?" "Rest. Controlled turnout. I can wrap it properly, monitor the inflammation. She'll be fine in 6 weeks if you're patient with her." He nodded. Was quiet, then "Thank you." 2 words. She could see how much they cost him. "Of course," she said. The neighbor came on day 6. Nora was stacking firewood alongside the barn. She'd started doing it because the stack looked like it would fall over by winter and someone needed to redo it, when a woman in her 50s appeared at the edge of the yard in a wide-brimmed hat, arms crossed. "So it's true," the woman said. Bridger Cott actually went and did it. Nora straightened. Set down the log in her hand. "I'm Nora, June Devereaux. I'm the closest neighbor, which isn't saying much at 12 miles. June looked her over with the frank assessment of someone who's lived in the same place long enough to see everything. "How long've you known him?" "Long enough," Nora said. She'd decided on this answer before she got here. June's mouth twitched. "That's the same thing," he said. Exact words. She seemed to find this funny. "You're younger than I expected. I could say the same about the assumption." June laughed. Actually laughed, a real one. "I'm not here to be rude, honey. I'm here because Bridger hasn't had another soul in that house in 4 years, and when Dale Cott died and left that estate clause hanging over him, I didn't think he'd actually." She stopped, tilted her head. "You know about the clause?" "I know about the clause. And you're still here." "I'm still here." June studied her for another moment. Then, "He's not easy. You probably figured that out. I've noticed he's quiet. He's gone. There's a difference. Man came back from 4 years of talking to nobody and forgot how to be with people." June's voice lost a little of its sharpness. "His wife." "I'm not asking about that," Nora said, gently, but clear. June looked at her with something that might have been respect. "No. Fair enough." She unfolded her arms, put her hands in her pockets. "I'm making a pot of soup tomorrow. I'll bring you some." "You don't have to." "I know I don't." "That's how you know I mean it," and nodded once. The way people do out here when they're done with a thing, and left. Nora went back to stacking wood. That evening she told Bridger that June had come by. He made a sound that was somewhere between acknowledgement and dread. "She'll be back," Nora said. "She always is. Is that a bad thing?" He thought about it seriously. The way she was learning, he thought about everything. Like the question deserved real consideration and not just a reflexive answer. "No," he said finally. "She kept the power on at this place when I couldn't get into town one winter. Left groceries at the gate." He paused. "She's a good woman. I don't know how to be." He stopped. "Around people," she finished. He looked at her. "Yeah, me too," she said, and meant it. He looked back at his plate. Neither of them said anything else. But the silence after that had a different quality than the silences before it. She found the box on a Saturday, 2 weeks in. She wasn't snooping. She was looking for a canning jar lid in the back of the pantry, and the shelf gave slightly, and a cardboard box slid off the top, and everything in it scattered across the kitchen floor. Baby things. A hand-knitted yellow blanket. A rattle shaped like a sun. A small card from what must have been a baby shower with names signed in cheerful ink. Nora crouched and put everything back carefully, exactly as it had been. Her hands were steady. She was very deliberate about that. She put the box back on the shelf and closed the pantry door and stood in the kitchen for a moment with her hand flat against the door. When Bridger came in an hour later, she said, without turning around, "I found a box in the pantry by accident. The shelf is loose. I put everything back the way it was." He went still in the doorway. "I didn't look at anything," she said. "But I thought you should know I'd seen it." A long silence. "Her name was Abigail," he said. His voice sounded like someone walking on ice, choosing each step. "She died, her and thee. She was 7 months along. There was a car, it was winter, and the road." He stopped. "That was 4 years ago." Nora turned around. He was standing in the middle of the kitchen, hat still in his hand, looking at the floor. "I'm sorry," she said. The words felt small and exactly right at the same time. I don't usually tell people that. You didn't tell me," I asked. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, but something. "You didn't ask," he said. "I know." She paused. "But you answered anyway." He put his hat on the hook by the door and went to wash his hands at the sink, his back to her. She went back to what she was doing. They didn't speak about it again that night, but it was different after, like a room with a window that had previously been nailed shut. The meeting with the estate lawyer was on a Tuesday. They drove into town together for the first time. Nora wore the only dress she'd brought, dark blue plain, and Bridger wore a collar that was clearly not something he reached for often. He'd combed his hair. She noticed because it revealed more of his face than she was used to seeing, and his face, it turned out, was harder to look away from than she'd expected. She looked away. The lawyer's name was Prentice, and he was the kind of man who had spent so long in small rooms, full of documents, that he'd started to resemble one. He asked them questions in the flat, efficient way of someone who did this twice a month. How long had they known each other? How did they meet? Did they intend to establish permanent residence at Cutter Ridge together? Nora answered in the practiced way she'd rehearsed on the drive. Bridger answered in fewer words but didn't contradict her. Prentice looked at them over his glasses. "I'll be frank with you, Mr. Cott," he said. "Your cousin Raymond has challenged the estate. He's filed a claim asserting that this marriage was entered into specifically to satisfy the inheritance clause, and that it is therefore not a genuine marital union." The air in the room changed. "On what grounds?" Nora asked. "Primarily timeline. The marriage was registered 6 weeks after the estate executor informed you of the clause." Prentice folded his hands. "He's requested a formal interview, both of you, with a mediator present." Bridger said nothing. He was looking at a point somewhere above the lawyer's head with an expression like a man doing arithmetic in a burning building. Nora said, "Fine, set it up." Prentice looked at her. "Mrs. Cott, you should know that if the marriage is found to be fraudulent—" "It's not fraudulent," she said. "Set it up." In the truck on the way home, Bridger didn't speak for a long time. The Wyoming landscape moved past the windows, brown and gold and endless. Then he said, "You don't have to. I know I don't. Raymond will. I don't care what Raymond does." Bridger looked at her, full on, the kind of look she'd been avoiding. "Why?" he said. Just the one word. Genuine, not suspicious. "Why are you doing this?" She looked at the road ahead. "Because I know what it's like," she said. "When someone tries to take something from you that was built by someone you loved, and I know what it costs to lose it." She paused. "And I'm not going to let that happen to you if I can help it." He didn't say anything. She could feel him looking at her for a long time, and then looking away. When they got back to the ranch, she got out of the truck and went to check on the mare. She hadn't told him about David. She hadn't told anyone about David, not fully, not the real version. What people knew, if they knew anything, was that Nora Finch had left Cheyenne in a hurry. What people knew was that there had been a situation at the veterinary practice she'd been part of. What people didn't know was that David Harmon, her fiancé of 2 years, her business partner, the man whose photograph was on both their desks, had been billing clients for medications that weren't being administered, pocketing the difference, and for the past 8 months had been feeding the ordering records through a second account in Nora's name. She hadn't known. She'd found out the same week she found the document he'd forged with her signature. The same week, the practice manager had asked her to come in for a conversation that turned out to be a confrontation. The same week, David had called her from his car and told her, calmly, that she'd better be careful what she said to anyone, because the paper trail currently pointed in one direction, and it wasn't toward him. She'd gone to the state licensing board. They'd opened an investigation. Her license wasn't suspended yet. The word "yet" doing the kind of work in her mind that it had no right to do. She wasn't running. She'd told herself that every mile of the drive out here, she was waiting. There was a difference. She just needed somewhere to be while she waited, and somewhere no one who knew David Harmon would think to look. Bridger didn't know any of this. She hadn't told him because it wasn't part of the arrangement. The arrangement was practical. She kept her end. He kept his. She wasn't going to complicate it with her catastrophe. But the problem with living in a small house with one other person was that catastrophes have a way of surfacing. The call came on a Thursday, while she was in the barn rewrapping the mare's leg. Her phone rang. She saw the number, her former licensing board contact, and picked up. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. When it was over, she sat down in the straw beside the mare's feet and put her head in her hands. David had gotten to someone. Not the board, not directly, but someone who talked to someone. A statement had been submitted calling her character into question, calling her professional judgment into question, claiming she had knowingly participated in the billing fraud because she'd wanted the money to leave the practice and, here was the part that made her feel sick, start over somewhere new. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her knees. Bad news. She looked up. Bridger was in the barn doorway, silhouetted. She didn't know how long he'd been standing there. Yes, she said. He came in. Sat down on a hay bale a few feet away, not crowding her. The horses moved quietly around them. You don't have to tell me, he said. She thought about not telling him. It would have been easier. She was good at carrying things quietly. She'd gotten very good at it in the past year. But she was so tired of carrying it, she told him. Not everything at once. It came out in the particular uneven way that real things come out. Not a narrative, but a collection of pieces, and he let her lay them out without interrupting. She told him about David and the practice and the forged records and the license and the statement that had just been filed and what it meant if the investigation went the wrong way. When she finished, the barn was very quiet. He's counting on you having nowhere to go, Bridger said. It wasn't what she'd expected him to say. She'd expected something sympathetic, maybe, or something practical about next steps. Yes, she said. He's wrong, Bridger said. He said it the way he said everything, not for effect, not to make her feel better. Like it was simply a fact he was correcting. You have somewhere to go. You're here. She looked at him. He was looking at the mare, not at her, which somehow made it easier to hear. Whatever he filed, whatever he said, you're a licensed veterinarian working at a functioning ranch operation. That's documented. That's real. He paused. If you need the ranch's records to show that, they're yours to use. She didn't say anything for a long moment. You don't even know if I'm telling the truth, she said. About what happened, no, he agreed. But I know how someone sounds when they're telling the truth. He finally looked at her. And I know you've had 4 different chances to leave this place, and you're still fixing my horse. She laughed. It surprised her. The laugh came out before she could stop it. Rough and not quite right, but real. Your horse is fine, she managed. Then you've got no excuse to stay, he said, except that you want to. Do you? She almost asked. She didn't. She got up and finished rewrapping the mare's leg, and Bridger got up and went back to his work, and nothing was resolved. But something had shifted. The way things shift in houses where people are living alongside each other and slowly, accidentally, becoming something. Raymond Cott arrived on a Friday with a lawyer of his own, and the kind of energy that enters rooms before the person does. He was in his late 40s, soft around the middle in the way of men who'd always had someone else to do the hard work, and he looked at Cutter Ridge the way buyers look at property they've already spent in their heads. Nora was on the porch when they pulled in. Is Bridger in? Raymond asked, without saying hello. He's in the upper pasture. You can wait. She didn't move from the porch steps. Or you can leave and come back at a time when you were invited. Raymond's lawyer, a young man with a briefcase, looked at his shoes. Raymond looked at Nora the way men look at women they've decided don't matter. You're the wife. I'm his wife. Yes. Quick wedding. People say that. People also say. He smiled, not kindly, that a marriage of convenience is still a marriage of convenience no matter what you call it. People who've been married 3 times, Nora said pleasantly, probably have strong opinions about what constitutes a real marriage. That's interesting. The lawyer's chin dropped approximately 1 inch. Raymond's smile thinned. You think this is funny? I think you drove 3 hours to intimidate someone on their own front porch, Nora said, And it didn't work, and now you're going to get back in your truck and wait for the formal mediation process like a grown adult. Bridger's truck appeared at the ridgeline and came down toward them. Nora watched Raymond calculate whether to push before Bridger got there or wait. He waited, which told her everything about him. Bridger got out of the truck, looked at Raymond, looked at Nora. He showed up without an appointment, Nora said. I was just explaining the mediation schedule to him. Bridger looked at Raymond for a long moment. You heard her, he said. Raymond left. His lawyer followed, still looking at his shoes. When the car disappeared down the road, Bridger came to stand beside her on the porch. They watched the dust settle together. 3 times, he said. I asked June. He exhaled something that might, under different conditions, have been a laugh. Of course you did. They stood there in the late afternoon light, the kind that makes everything look more important than it is. She was very aware of how close they were standing. He's going to push hard at the mediation, she said. I know. They'll want to know things, details. Things married people know about each other. She paused. We should probably actually learn some of those things. Bridger was quiet for a moment. Then, I take my coffee black. I can't sleep if there's a light on. I had a dog named Pershing for 12 years and I haven't gotten another one because it still doesn't feel right. He said it matter-of-factly, the way he might describe the acreage. Nora's throat tightened. I take my coffee with too much sugar, she said. I hum when I'm nervous, though I've been told I don't notice I'm doing it. I've wanted to work with animals since I was 6 and I was good at it. I'm going to be good at it again. He looked at her at that last sentence, like he'd heard the word she'd put the most weight on. Yeah, he said, you are. The mediation was set for a Monday. On Sunday night, Nora couldn't sleep. She lay in the small room with the grandmother's quilt and listened to the ranch sounds, the horses settling, the wind across the flat land, and thought about what she was doing, and whether she could do it, and whether it had crossed the line from arrangement into something she didn't have a word for yet. She got up, made tea, stood at the kitchen window in the dark. Bridger appeared in the doorway in a t-shirt and the old wool socks she'd noticed him wearing every night. He looked at her, looked at the kettle. Couldn't sleep either, he said. No. He made himself coffee, real coffee, at 11 at night, which explained some things about him, and sat down at the table, and she sat across from him, and they stayed like that for a while without talking. Then he said, Tell me something true. Something you haven't told anyone. She looked at him. He was looking at his mug. The night I found David's records, she said, I didn't go to the board first. I called him. I thought there must be an explanation. I gave him the chance to explain. She wrapped her hands around her tea. He told me I was being paranoid. That I was always like this, suspicious, difficult, looking for problems. And for about 6 hours I believed him. She paused. That's the part that's hardest to say out loud, that I almost let him convince me I was the problem. Bridger was quiet. Your turn, she said. He thought about it for a long time, long enough that she thought he might not answer. I don't come inside until after dark, he said. Most nights. I know the work doesn't take that long. But if I come in when it's still light, the house feels. He stopped. There's too much space, without someone in it. She understood that in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. We're a sorry pair, she said. Probably. Think we can convince a mediator we're real? He looked up from his mug, met her eyes, and didn't look away this time. I think we are real, he said. Some of it at least. She felt that in her sternum. Some of it, she agreed, and looked back at her tea. The mediation was not what Raymond had expected. That was clear from the first 20 minutes they'd prepared. Not by rehearsing stories, they'd talked about that and decided against it. Too much risk of inconsistency. But by simply talking to each other more than they had been. 3 evenings in a row, sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, swapping details, her terror of confined spaces. She hadn't been in an elevator in 4 years. His particular loyalty to the ranch's original fence lines wouldn't modernize them even when it would be easier. The way she'd named the mare Billy in her head, though she'd never said it out loud until now. The way he'd been calling the gelding the Gray for 4 years, because giving him a real name hadn't felt right until someone else was living there. You called him Keats, the mediator read from her notes, something they'd mentioned in passing. That's an unusual name for a horse. He's an unusual horse, Nora said. Raymond's lawyer tried methodically to find the seams. How had they met? Through a mutual contact, true. Had they spent time together before the marriage? Some. Technically true if you counted 3 weeks of living alongside each other. What had Bridger said, the first time she'd really thought she might love him? Love. The word landed in the room with weight. She hadn't thought about it in those terms. She looked at Bridger, sitting beside her with his hands flat on the table, very still. He answered it before she could. She was in the barn, he said. It was 3 in the morning. Billy, the mare, was having a rough night, and I woke up and saw the light on in the barn and went out, and Nora was just sitting there in the straw next to the horse, talking to her, not doing anything, just talking. He paused. She didn't know I was there. She was telling the horse that she was going to be fine, that she'd been through worse, and she was going to be fine. He looked at the table. I went back inside. I didn't want to interrupt. Nora's hands were very still in her lap. That's when I knew, Bridger said. The mediator wrote something down. Raymond's lawyer tried 3 more angles and got nowhere. Outside after, Bridger stood at the truck. Nora stood a few feet away. The town's sounds moved around them. A dog somewhere, a car on the main street, the ordinary afternoon of a place that didn't know anything had just happened. Was that true? She said. What you told her. He looked at the truck bed. Which part? The barn. 3 in the morning. A long pause. I was in the barn, he said. At 3. You were there. I didn't see you. I know. He opened the truck door. Not getting in yet. Just holding it. I went back inside because I didn't know what to do with it. What I was. He stopped. What I was feeling. She stood there in the ordinary afternoon and felt something in her chest shift, like a tectonic plate. Slow, enormous, changing the whole geography without announcement. Bridger, she said. He looked at her. You don't have to do anything with it right now, she said. We have time. He was quiet for a moment. Then, very quietly, do we? I'm not going anywhere, she said. Even when the licensing investigation is done, even when Raymond's challenge is dismissed, I'm not. She stopped, made herself say it plainly. I don't want to leave. His grip on the truck door tightened slightly. She could see it. This is, he started. Strino. Completely strange. She met his eyes. But it's real. The parts that matter are real. You said so. I did. Were you right? He closed the truck door, took 2 steps toward her. She stayed where she was. Yeah, he said. I was right. He was close enough that she had to look up slightly to see his face, and his face was doing something it hadn't done before. Not softer exactly, but open, the way closed-up houses look when someone finally takes the boards off the windows. He kissed her, careful, like he was still asking. She kissed him back, which was her answer. When they broke apart, the afternoon was still ordinary, the dog still somewhere, the car still on the main street, everything the same, and none of it the same. We should get back, he said. Keats needs his feed. He does, she agreed. They got in the truck. Drove home in the particular silence of 2 people who have just said something important and are still sitting with the fact of it. The investigation closed 6 weeks later. The state licensing board found insufficient evidence to proceed against Nora Finch. The evidence they did find, the forged signature, the account discrepancies, the timeline of David Harmal's system access, pointed elsewhere, as it had always pointed when you looked at it without his hand on the scale. He had retained 3 lawyers by then. They were expensive and not enough. Nora got the call in the morning, standing at the kitchen sink, and stood very still while the board contact ran through the language of the letter she'd be receiving. When she hung up, Bridger was in the doorway. She told him. It took about 45 seconds because she didn't have words for it yet, just the facts. It's over. The license is clear. They found what they needed. He crossed the kitchen, put his arms around her. She held on. She cried, which she hadn't done through any of it. Not when she found the records, not when David threatened her, not when the board opened the investigation. She cried now, her face against his shoulder, in the kitchen that smelled like coffee, and this life she'd been building without a plan. He held on. Raymond Cott's challenge was dismissed on a Thursday. Prentice called to let them know, sounding mildly pleased in the way lawyers sound when they've been proven right. Cutter Ridge and the full acreage of Dale Cott's estate passed to Bridger outright. That evening, June Devereaux showed up with a bottle of bourbon and 2 loaves of bread she'd baked that morning, and the news that half the county had been following the situation and was pleased with the outcome. You've made some friends, June said, sitting at the kitchen table with her feet up. People around here weren't going to let Raymond get his hands on that land. They remember what he did with the Aldane property. What did he do with the Aldane property? Nora asked. Sold it to a resort company from Denver. There's a parking structure on it now. June poured bourbon with the confidence of someone in her own home. That's not happening to Cutter Ridge. They stayed up late, the three of them, and June told stories about Bridger's grandfather, and the history of the land, and the hard winters, and the seasons when the hay ran out. Bridger was quieter than Nora had heard him in weeks, but it wasn't the old quiet, the gone-away kind. It was the quiet of someone listening to something they needed to hear. After June left, Nora and Bridger stood in the front doorway in the cooling night, looking out over the land that was finally fully his. "Tell me something," she said. He looked at her sideways. "I used to think," he said slowly, "that I was just waiting. For I don't know, for the ranch to fail, or for me to give up, or for something to tell me it was done. That this chapter was done." He paused. "I stopped making plans. 4 years of not making plans. And now?" He was quiet for a moment. The horses were still in the dark pasture, the moon making silver of the water trough. "I want to fix the north barn," he said. "Actually fix it, not patch it. I want to add 2 more horses. I want to see what we could do if the practice here was more, if there was a real operation." He glanced at her. "If you stayed and we made it into something real." "I'm staying," she said. "I know. I'm asking if you want to build something." She looked out at the land, the flat dark reach of it, the sky over it, the impossible amount of possibility in a thing that at first glance looked like nothing but distance. "Yes," she said. He took her hand. Didn't say anything, didn't need to. 3 months after Nora Finch had climbed out of a taxi at the edge of a gravel yard with a broken zippered suitcase and a name on a piece of paper, she stood on the same porch in the early dark and felt, for the first time in a long time, that the ground under her feet was hers, not because anyone had given it to her, because she'd earned it, the same way Bridger had earned it, the same way anything real is earned. By staying, by working, by choosing every single morning to still be here. The mare, Billy, was sound at last. Keats watched them from the pasture with his head over the fence line. The hay for winter was stacked properly. The north barn still needed work, but that was a problem for tomorrow, and tomorrow was something they were both now making plans for. Nora leaned her head against Bridger's shoulder, and he let her, and the Wyoming night did what Wyoming nights do, spread out in every direction, enormous and indifferent, leaving 2 small people in the middle of it who had, against several odds, found something worth holding on to. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.